Brother, listen, when did you last sit truly alone and add up everything you gave away? Not the smile for company. Not the version you dressed up to be liked. I mean the man under the performance. The one who swallowed his hurt and kept showing up. The one who gave like it was air and never thought to keep track. You sat in rooms full of noise and still felt emptier than the quiet. You whispered truth and waited for it to land. It bounced. You tried to explain. You tried to prove. You learned how heavy love could be when it's one-sided. You learned that being constant can be mistaken for safe to take for granted. She went silent. At first you filled the gaps with hope. Then you filled them with words. Then with actions. Any man would. You believed presence could fix absence. You were wrong. Her silence was not a test of your loyalty. It was a sign she could not meet the depth you offered. She retreated into distance and called it peace. You mistook absence for power. You thought quiet meant strength. It did not. It meant she did not know how to go deeper. You weren't weak for wanting depth. You weren't needy for wanting answers. You were human. You carried more than you showed. You held weight nobody asked about. You patched holes quietly. You swallowed nights that should have been shared. You traded ease for effort because you believed loyalty deserved reciprocity. When you stopped chasing, everything changed. Not because she suddenly became smarter. Because silence turned into sound when it hit a space empty of your chasing. Her ears opened to the ghost you left behind. That void sounded different. It was the echo of value she never learned to recognize. She heard the absence of being seen. She felt the vacuum of the man who stopped shrinking. This is the cruel lesson most men never get to teach. You do not need to scream to be tall. You do not need to break to be noticed. Calm, deliberate withdrawal rewrites the story. You take your dignity with you. You do not beg for respect. You remove the stage from under the play. Suddenly her performance meets no audience. Don't confuse this for winning. Don't do it to punish. Do it to protect. Do it to find the man who was hiding. Healing is not a weapon. Withdrawal is not theater. It is a return to self. When you walk away quietly, you carry your backbone. You carry the proof that you valued yourself enough to stop funding her comfort. If she comes back to question what she lost, let her. You already know. You counted the pieces. You chose to keep what remained whole. You chose yourself. That is the first act of a man who will never again trade his peace for fragments. Stand where you belong. Build with men who match your measure. Refuse rooms that taught you to shrink. Return to joy that adds strength. Future you will thank you for refusing smallness and purpose. You were there every single time. The message always answered. The call never ignored. The effort never delayed. You gave consistency in a world that thrives on inconsistency. You gave something most people only dream of, presence without condition. That should have been enough. In fact, that should have been more than enough. But she confused what was rare with what was replaceable. She saw your rhythm and labeled it routine. She looked at your steadiness and called it boring. She assumed tomorrow would look like today because you had always delivered. She never realized each day was a choice. Each reply, each call, each effort was not automatic. It was deliberate. You showed up because you cared, not because you had to. But she misread loyalty as a guarantee. It is the oldest mistake. People think the man who keeps showing up will never leave. They confuse predictability with permanence. They believe there will always be another chance, another tomorrow, another moment to fix it. She thought the sun would rise no matter how many times she spit at the light. What she didn't see was that consistency is fragile when it is unappreciated. You carried reliability like armor. She treated it like background noise. You weren't fireworks, you were the foundation. But fireworks fade. Foundations last. She didn't understand that until the ground gave way beneath her. She thought stability was dull, until the day it disappeared. Then she realized the truth. Nothing shakes harder than the absence of the thing you always counted on. When you finally walked, you didn't announce it. You didn't leave half-open doors or trails to follow back. You didn't write reminders of what you gave. You left completely and in silence. That's what shook her. Not anger. Not shouting. Just absence. The kind of absence that rattles because it's final. That void hit her differently than any argument ever could. She expected you to return like you always had. She thought your patience had no expiration. She thought loyalty meant permanence. But permanence is earned, not granted. And when a steady man leaves, it is not temporary. He does not circle back. He does not hover in the background waiting for permission. He closes the chapter with no bookmark. Her shock wasn't about losing a lover. It was about losing her anchor. She never realized the calm she leaned on came from you. She never saw the strength behind the consistency. Now she feels the void and calls it chaos. But chaos is only the echo of the order you once brought. She didn't lose routine. She lost reliability. She lost safety. She lost peace. And you? You lost nothing. You rediscovered the worth in your steadiness. You reclaimed the strength in being dependable without being disposable. You learned that the rarest men are the ones who keep showing up until the day they don't, and when they leave, the absence is unforgettable. She seemed so calm while you were unraveling. On the surface, she looked unbothered, almost untouchable. But that peace wasn't hers, it was borrowed. It was built on your shoulders, held up by the weight you carried in silence. She didn't feel stable because she was strong. She felt stable because you were steady. You were the one absorbing the pressure. You were the one standing in the storm while she rested in the shelter of your effort. Your loyalty gave her security. Your consistency gave her balance. She leaned on your strength without ever acknowledging the cost. You were the provider of calm, and she mistook that calm for her own resilience. She never saw the cracks you hid. She never noticed the nights you stayed awake, fighting battles inside yourself just to keep her world steady. You bled quietly so she could breathe easily. You sacrificed rest so she could feel safe. And while you carried the load, she relaxed into comfort. She didn't question where the peace came from. She didn't ask why things felt steady. She assumed it was natural, automatic, unshakable. That's the danger of comfort. It blinds people to the source of their security. But here's the truth. You were never supposed to carry both weights. Partnership is balance. Love is mutual effort. You weren't meant to be the only one holding the rope. And the moment you loosened your grip, the whole structure trembled. She felt the shift instantly. That stillness she lived in cracked open. The peace she thought was hers slipped away. She couldn't hide behind ease anymore. The comfort she had built her life on wasn't real. It was your energy keeping her grounded. And when you finally withdrew, the imbalance showed. Suddenly, her world felt shaky. Suddenly, she knew the calm wasn't hers to claim. It was borrowed, and the lender had closed the account. Now she feels the weight you once carried. Now she tastes the uncertainty you lived with in silence. She's restless where she used to be composed. She's uneasy where she used to be confident. That's what happens when the source of peace walks away. The illusion breaks, and all that's left is the chaos she never noticed before. You see, you weren't just there. You were the reason she could breathe without fear. You were the anchor disguised as background. And when an anchor is removed, the whole ship drifts. That's why your absence is louder than your presence ever was. It reveals what was always true. She didn't create stability, she consumed it. And the beauty of it? Once you stop pouring, once you stop feeding her calm, you discover where your peace truly belongs. It doesn't belong in sacrifice that leaves you empty. It doesn't belong in someone who mistakes dependence for love. It belongs in you, where it can't be drained, where it can't be ignored, and where no one else can misuse it again. You gave her time. Time to sort herself out. Time to recognize what she had. Time to rise to the level you stood on. At first, you believed patience was a sign of strength. You thought giving space meant giving love. You thought waiting was proof of loyalty. And in a way it was. But she didn't see it that way. She treated your patience like an endless resource, something she could draw from forever without cost. Every unanswered question you forgave. Every delayed effort you tolerated. Every empty promise you endured. You told yourself she just needed more room, more understanding, more chances. You kept extending the deadline. You kept hoping the investment would eventually pay off. But patience is not infinite. It has a clock, and the ticking gets louder the longer it's ignored. She didn't hear it. She mistook your stillness for permanence. She thought the window would always be open, that no matter how many times she ignored it, tomorrow would bring another chance. She didn't realize patience is not permanent. It's a quiet form of warning. It's not proof you'll stay, it's a test of whether she will show up before time runs out. And when it ran out, there was no explosion. No screaming. No slammed doors. Just silence. That's the part people don't expect. They imagine the end will be loud. But real endings don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they slip in unnoticed, and by the time you realize what happened, the moment is gone forever. By the time she looked up, the clock had already stopped. You had already detached. You had already accepted that waiting longer would only destroy you. And that realization hit harder than any confrontation could. It wasn't anger she felt, it was emptiness. Because when a man finally ends his patience, he doesn't circle back. He doesn't repeat himself. He doesn't extend credit again. Your patience was never weakness. It was a gift. A final opportunity to see what most men would have abandoned long ago. And when she didn't take it, she lost it. That's when she learned the truth. Patience is not a guarantee. It is the last rope. And when it's cut, there's no climbing back. You may think you wasted years. But you didn't. You proved to yourself that you gave everything you could. You learned that love without reciprocity is slow self-destruction. And you discovered something most men never do. You found the edge of your patience and respected it. That edge is your boundary, and boundaries are where self-respect begins. She will remember your patience. Not because it lasted forever, but because it ended without warning. She will replay the silence in her head, wishing for one more chance. But by then you'll be long gone. Not bitter. Not broken. Just finished. And nothing is more final than a man who quietly refuses to wait any longer. You didn't lose her. That's the lie men tell themselves when it ends. You didn't lose anything because nothing worth keeping walks away from loyalty like yours. What really happened is this: she lost access to you. She lost the doorway to a love most people only dream of. She lost the presence of a man who gave without hesitation, who stood steady when storms came, who chose commitment over convenience. That's not a small thing. That's everything. She thought she was walking away from just another man. But you weren't another man. You were the kind of presence that changes how someone feels about safety. The kind of consistency that makes chaos livable. The kind of heart that turns uncertainty into home. When she stepped out of that space, she didn't just leave, you closed the gates behind her. And what she can't admit yet is that those gates don't open twice. Think about it. You gave her something she may never see again. Not attention. Not flattery. Real devotion. The kind that doesn't have conditions attached. The kind that doesn't check the scoreboard before giving effort. The kind that's rare in a world built on half-hearted gestures and empty promises. She didn't recognize it because she thought it would always be there. Now she knows better. The day she wakes up surrounded by men who don't care, who don't stay, who don't call back, she will remember. She'll remember the weight of being seen. She'll remember the calm of being valued. She'll remember the difference between being tolerated and being cherished. And that memory will sting because once access is gone, it's gone for good. You see, brother, she didn't downgrade to less. She downgraded to empty. Because no matter who comes after, they won't be you. They won't carry the same loyalty. They won't hold the same strength. They won't give the same depth. And she'll notice. Slowly at first. Then all at once. And when it hits her, regret will taste sharper than loss ever did. Don't confuse her absence with your failure. Don't twist her choice into proof you weren't enough. You were more than enough. That's why she struggles with the silence you left behind. You didn't just leave a relationship. You left a legacy in her memory. A mark she can't erase. And no matter how many distractions she surrounds herself with, that mark will stay. The real win is not her regret, it's your freedom. Because now your energy isn't wasted on someone who mishandled it. Now your loyalty can flow to a place it belongs. Now your love can be given to someone who recognizes its value before it's gone. That's the beauty of losing nothing. You don't walk away empty, you walk away intact. And she's the one who has to live with knowing she threw away what she'll never find again. You tried everything before you went quiet. You explained yourself until the words lost meaning. You argued until your throat burned. You repeated truths she refused to hear. None of it mattered. She wasn't listening. She wasn't trying to understand. She was comfortable knowing you'd keep speaking, keep proving, keep chasing validation. She mistook your effort for permanence, and that was her mistake. Then you stopped. Not with rage. Not with a dramatic exit. You just went still. That shift was louder than every word you ever spoke. Because silence, when it comes from detachment, carries a weight no argument can compete with. It isn't about anger. It isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the energy you wasted and pulling it back to yourself. That kind of silence is final. That kind of silence hits harder than any raised voice. Detachment isn't about punishing her. It's about choosing yourself. It's the moment you realize you don't have to play anymore. You don't have to explain what's already clear. You don't have to bleed just to be seen. You decide your piece is worth more than her recognition. And that decision rewrites the entire story. She expected you to beg. She expected you to fight harder. She expected you to come back with one more effort to prove she mattered. Instead, you gave her nothing. No reaction. No argument. No chase. Just stillness. That stillness became the mirror she couldn't avoid. Suddenly, she had to sit with herself, with her choices, with her silence reflected back at her. You see, detachment doesn't scream. It doesn't announce. It just removes oxygen from the fire. And without oxygen, the flames die. That's why she felt it so sharply. Because your calm withdrawal ended the game she thought she was winning. There was no one left to test, no one left to manipulate, no one left to lean on. She was left with herself, and that was the loudest lesson of all. The beauty is that detachment doesn't drain you. It restores you. You get back the time you were losing. You reclaim the strength you were giving away. You rediscover your own center, your own balance, your own worth. And once you taste that kind of freedom, you'll never settle for being drained again. She'll never forget the silence. Not because it was empty, but because it carried everything she refused to face. It told her the truth without a single word. You no longer cared. That's the most painful truth for anyone who thrived on control. When you stop reacting, she loses her grip. When you stop giving energy, she loses her power. And you? You gain everything back. Your calm becomes your armor. Your silence becomes your voice. Your detachment becomes your freedom. That's the loudest message you'll ever deliver, and the one she'll hear long after you've moved on. She delighted in pulling strings and watching reactions. Every doubt she planted was a probe to see if you would bend. Every petty test was designed to confirm she still held control. It wasn't affection, it was an experiment. She wanted proof that you would chase, that you would prove your worth on demand. That's how control hides itself, behind questions that pretend to be curiosity. You played along because you hoped the pattern would change. You answered the quizzes she set. You performed the reassurances she demanded. You thought effort would turn manipulation into commitment. Instead, the rehearsal just taught her how far she could push. Your responses became predictable data for her. When pressed, you appeased. When challenged, you explained. When caught between anger and giving in, you chose soft. Then something shifted inside you. Not overnight, not dramatized, simply put, you grew. Your priorities rearranged. Responses that used to feel urgent now felt unnecessary. The setups that once snagged you no longer landed. Growth quieted the reflex to prove. It cut the cord connected to her levers. Where she expected motion, she found stillness. Where she expected panic, she found peace. That silence wasn't surrender, it was evolution. Without your reactions, her toolkit failed. Tests are only effective when someone answers them. Remove the answer and the test collapses into nonsense. The theatrics lose potency. The manipulative questions become hollow echoes. Control needs response to survive. Take the response away and what's left is a person performing for no audience. She was startled by the new rules. She had a playbook that relied on a certain script. When you burned the pages, panic followed. No prompts, no cues, no trapped emotions to pull. Her power was procedural, your growth was a rewrite. She couldn't flex control at will anymore because the muscle she used, your need to validate, wasn't there to exercise against. This isn't about winning or revenge. It's about refusing to be the engine that runs someone else's show. Growth means you stop supplying the fuel for games that erode your dignity. It means setting a new baseline. You will no longer perform to prove value. You will no longer accept trials disguised as concern. You will choose growth over reaction, integrity over validation. When you stop being the stagehand for drama, you reclaim your time, your focus, your peace. That empties the room of cheap power plays. It exposes manipulation for what it is, strategy without substance. And as your life fills with work, joy, and honest people, the need to play those old parts disappears. She will notice the difference. At first she will test harder, trying to find a way back into the old pattern. When that fails, the act will quiet. And finally, she will sit with the reality that the man she measured by his responses no longer performs for approval. That realization is the end of her leverage and the beginning of your freedom. Keep moving forward. Your growth is the permanent answer she can never orchestrate or manufacture again for anyone who doubts. You stopped fighting the past and started building the future. The work you did in private was not petty revenge. It was a quiet resurrection. Every morning you pushed a little harder. Every habit you fixed, every hour you reclaimed, each became a brick in a life she could no longer touch. Healing looked ordinary from the outside, but inside it rewired you. Joy returned in tiny, stubborn ways. You laughed at things that used to hollow you out. You pursued projects that filled your mind, not to distract, but to expand. You trained your body, sharpened your mind, and learned to care for yourself with a discipline that had nothing to do with proving a point. That discipline became attractive because it was real, not performative. Success wasn't a trophy to wave at her. It was proof you could stand on your own 2 feet without bitterness. You found new friends who matched your effort. You surrounded yourself with people who pushed you rather than pulled you down. Those relationships repaid your investment in ways her presence never did. Confidence came back as competence. You reclaimed your identity beyond the role she assigned you. You stopped checking for approval. You started making plans for a life that did not depend on being seen by her. That independence looked small at first. Then it grew, then it became undeniable. You rebuilt boundaries like a fortress. No more bending into shapes that did not fit you. No more pretending wounds were healed when they festered. You learned to say no without guilt and yes for the right reasons. Those boundaries became the quiet barrier between the man you were and the man you would be. Laughter returned as evidence of healing. It wasn't the hollow laugh that begged for attention. It was the loud, bodily kind that comes from inside. You met new experiences with curiosity. You opened new doors and walked through them. You didn't wait for her permission to be joyful. People noticed. Not because you shouted, but because you moved differently. You walked with a steadiness that made others want to stand taller. Attention followed, yes, but it mattered less than the fact you were okay without it. Watching you thrive without needing validation becomes a mirror that shows everyone what strength looks like. When she sees you, she will not find a husk. She will find a man who rebuilt himself without rancor. That sight hurts more than a fight because it proves what she thought broken was actually resilient. Regret comes slow and precise. It isn't dramatic. It arrives in glimpses, in comparisons, in the quiet fact that she can no longer claim you as a safety net. This is not vengeance. It's a life redirected. Your healing is the most truthful answer to doubt. It speaks with action, not noise. It says, I am still here, better than before, and I will not be small again. There is no louder signal than a man who lives well after loss. Keep building, brother. Let your rising be the only voice she ever remembers forever after. You were never the problem. The truth is brutal and simple. You brought what depth requires and she carried what depth refused. You offered vulnerability without apology. You showed up with feeling and intention. That honesty was not a flaw, it was the currency of a rare connection. She mistook that currency for excess and priced you out of her comfort zone. You weren't fragile for feeling. You weren't weak for wanting realness. You weren't too much, you were exact. You matched what a deep relationship asks for: consistency, accountability, presence. Those things terrify people who survive on surface comforts. When she labeled you as overwhelming, what she actually revealed was a limit of her own capacity. This is where the lie ends. Men convinced themselves they lost because they were too intense or too kind. That story lets pain feel like personal failure. It's easier to shrink than to accept that someone else's inability to grow caused the gap. But shrinking never fixed anything. It only teaches others how to take more. Don't rewrite your value to fit someone else's lack. If she couldn't hold the gravity you offered, that isn't your defect. It's hers. Depth is demanding. It requires both parties to be anchored. If she preferred drama to depth, if she chose unpredictability over steadiness, that choice reflects her preferences, not your shortcomings. Remember, you brought standards, not ultimatums. Wanting to be seen, heard, and matched is not a crime. It's clarity. It separates casual attachments from true investments. When you accept less, you train the world to give less. When you refuse to be small, you force clarity, and clarity reveals incompatibility faster than compromise ever could. This moment, when you step away from apologizing for the size of your heart, is the turning point. It's the beginning of a life where you no longer barter your peace for acceptance. It's the place where you build with people who understand the cost and value of what you offer. It's where you stop negotiating your core just so someone else can breathe easier. There will be people who fear depth. There will be those who run from responsibility disguised as intensity. Let them go. They were never meant to match the life you want. Your future requires partners who can meet your scale, not shrink it. Your work now is to grow into the standards you refuse to lower and to find the circle that honors that growth. In time, memories of being accused of too much will change. They will become proof of your refusal to dilute yourself to fit someone else's threshold. You will look back and see that those accusations were not judgments but admissions. Admissions that she could not step up. That clarity frees you. So stop apologizing for having depth. Stand firm in the measure of your worth. You weren't excessive, you were precise. She wasn't ready. And that mismatch is the reason you walked toward something better, not because you were too much, but because you knew your value and refused to trade it for a temporary ease. Keep moving forward. Your future rewards steady courage. If this landed, subscribe, join the men rebuilding for real. Stay sharp, brother. Your peace is non-negotiable.